I'd like you to rethink your assumptions about leadership and management. And the way I'd like to start this is by asking you a question. What do you believe you are, a leader or a manager? Now that's not an easy question to answer because most people associate themselves with one or another. They've learned what a manager is supposed to be and what a leader is supposed to be. And yet if you were to look at the activities engaged in both of them, they're involved in strategizing, they're involved in budgeting, you're involved in working relationships, innovating, and on and on and on. And you really can't be a leader without managing. You can't really manage without being a leader in one way, shape, or form. And by locking on to one, I think what we've done is we've done a disservice to the concept of that person being in the front and leading the charge. Now, there's a guy who, an individual, Bill Novelli, who ran AARP, which is an organization in the States that takes care of people who are 50, I think it's 50 years and older. And he said to me one day on his phone, on the phone, he said, I have 120 managers on my leadership team. And what he was doing was he was almost saying there's an interconnectivity. And by having that perspective, he understands that across the board, we all work doing the same types of roles. Now, I think that we've actually, by adding this complexity, we've hindered the performance of individuals, actually hindered them. Because some people say, oh, I'm not a leader, I'm a manager. You have 12 people in a room and you have to get them to do something in IT. Do you have to lead them? Do you have to come up with directions, strategy? Do you have to create alliances? Are you forecasting? Absolutely. Yet I've had other people who've done the exact opposite. And I'll share with you a story closer to the end of an example of that. So to give you a demonstration of, I'd like to travel back to where this might have come from. If you travel back to before the 1870s in Western civilization, there were really no big organizations that there are, such as there are today, a Walmart or an Accenture. The largest organization at the time was not really a tied organization, but it was the building of the Transcontinental Railroad in the United States. That was the closest I could find in history of one organization. Now, when I ask people what was the largest organization prior to the 1800s, the one that always comes up is religion. And religion is separate entities. It wasn't one structured organization that worked together and formed strategy together in the same way as you will see in more of a profit type environment or military. And that's where the other one came from. The largest organizations were military. Besides that, it was military. And that's where people learned to lead. People would work in be in the military, learn structure, learn process, learn chain of command, and then be able to use that in their future endeavors. We don't have that the same way in many cultures around the world where they're learning the military application. So think about the role. You didn't have the telecommunications, you didn't have all of the transportation mechanisms. And if we went back to Julius Caesar, he knew when he brought his team together that when he sat down and went over planning, they all had to get it. They sat in a sandbox and they drew out what would happen. And Julius also knew if he said, hey, you're going to go on a 5-day ride and you're going to go on a 12-day ride and you're going to go on a 13-day ride, that when they were all done, when they got to their posts, they couldn't call up and say, hey, Julius, I got a problem with sexual harassment. They couldn't do that. They had to handle it. So Julius or any of the leaders knew that if their management team, their leadership team, whatever you wanted to find it, had to be able to perform on the job. And I think that the hindrance to some degree is we know that someone can call us, so we don't teach them as well. We know that the person has the ability to travel back to our office, so we don't teach them as well. What if we change that? What if we had a completely different paradigm or a different look at it? We had to have people battle ready. Now, leadership management actually goes back 4,000 years. I mean, we have signs of leading or management principles back with the Egyptians. So to say that there's modern day management, we have one that's located, it's about 100 years old. But if you really did some research, we can go back throughout history, and there's always been leading and management, and the separation of them has happened, I'd say, in the past 30 years, where they've got so far apart that we have individuals who now think, I don't have to lead, or I don't have to manage, and they use those terms. There's a person who ran, the story I promised you, a national organization in the US, had close to 3,000 members, and he had a second in command, and he would constantly say, no, I'm the leader, you're a manager. I come up with the ideas and then you follow through on them. And it ended up being non-productive because they never shared in the insight that if I come up with an idea, I have to think it through. I have to engage in the act of getting people involved. I have to sell them on the concept. And it was detrimental to the organization. And today that organization only has 1,000 members, and partly due to this person's influence. So it's clouding our judgment. And what I'd like to say is, in Paid to Think, we're going to, when I use the terminology leading and managing interchangeably, I'm really talking about the act of that person getting others to get where they need to be and to enable them to be empowered to do their role. And I hope you see that in the pages you read, and I hope you feel it when I'm talking. So that said, there is an approach that I'd like you to see, is that a viewpoint that's a little bit different, and an assumption that I'd like you to change.